The metal door slammed so hard it echoed across the fishing pier of Alert Bay at first light. People turned, some startled, some afraid, as the officer barked, "Stand back! This animal is dangerous." But the dog inside the crate wasn't snarling. It was shaking, hard, as if the sky itself were about to fall on it. From the far end of the dock, Elias Cross, broad-shouldered, scarred from years on patrol, stopped mid-stride. His hands tightened. His breath stalled. "Stop," he said, voice low but razor-sharp. The officer snapped back. "Move along, old man. This one's done." The dog lifted its head then, eyes wide, scanning the rooftops, trembling like it remembered a threat no one else could see. And in that instant, something in Elias broke open. He had seen that look once before. Minutes before the blast took his partner. The crowd sensed the shift but didn't understand it. Only Elias did. And when he stepped toward the cage, the officer's hand hovered over his taser. What Elias does next will decide whether this creature dies, or whether two wounded veterans finally find a way back to the world. If this hit you already, like the video and subscribe to Canada's Heartfelt Tales. The rest of the story will stay with you long after it ends. The first rays of dawn were still pale against the jagged horizon when Elias Cross stood on the edge of the pier. The quiet of the early morning was shattered by the thrashing noise of the German shepherd inside the transport crate. He could see the dog's eyes, wide and desperate, its body quivering from the violent force of its own panic. The heavy scent of saltwater filled the air, mingling with the faint rustle of pine trees in the distance. The officer, young and hasty, was struggling to control the situation, trying to force the dog back into the steel cage, but the animal wasn't behaving like a rabid beast. It was not violent, it was terrified. Elias, standing a few feet away, caught sight of the ragged, bloodied forearm of the officer, the mark of a struggle he didn't want to remember. "Get away from it, old man. This one's beyond saving," the officer snapped, his voice rough, his patience worn thin. But Elias did not move, his boots pressing into the gravel as he fixed his gaze on the dog. Something in the way it trembled, the way it kept looking at the sky, sent a chill through his spine. A familiar terror rose in his chest. It was a sign, a signal he had learned to recognize. The dog wasn't just looking for a way out, it was searching for danger from above. Elias's hand involuntarily gripped the side of his truck. The sound of the dog's panicked whines triggered a memory he had buried deep. His K9 partner in Afghanistan. The same frantic eyes. The same desperation. "No," Elias whispered to himself. "Not again." The sky over Kandahar had been hot, a searing heat that swallowed everything in its path. Max, his partner, had been the best of them all. Quick, loyal, sharp. His instincts were Elias's lifeline. Together they had survived ambushes, roadside bombs, and the constant shadow of death. Max was the one who always knew when something was wrong, before anyone else did. The day Max died, the ground had trembled beneath their feet. Elias had been pushing forward when Max stopped. His ears flat against his skull. His eyes wide with that unmistakable warning. Max had alerted. But Elias hesitated. He had been tired, exhausted, the weight of 1,000 days of constant combat pressing down on him. He didn't listen to Max's warning. He sent him forward. Max had taken the brunt of the blast, saving Elias and the rest of the squad, but it cost him everything. Elias had watched his partner, his best friend, go down, and all he could do was scream. The weight of his failure crushed him then, and it still crushed him now. Elias had disappeared after that, retreating to the mountains of British Columbia, hiding from a war that he could never escape. His isolation became his fortress, and his memories his chains. He ran just like he had in Afghanistan, and now, standing here with the dog's terrified eyes locked on his, he realized he hadn't outrun anything. The war was still in him, still haunting him in ways he could not outrun. The officer's voice broke through Elias's thoughts, snapping him back to the present. "Step aside," he barked again, his hand still hovering near his taser. But Elias didn't move. The officer's words felt like a hammer on his chest, but he couldn't leave this moment. Not this time. Not when he knew what that dog was feeling. You don't understand. Elias's voice was rough, but steady as he finally spoke. This dog isn't just scared. He's been through something. And I'm not walking away from it. The officer's eyes narrowed, but Elias could see the uncertainty in his stance, the way his shoulders tensed. The crowd, which had gathered around them, was silent, sensing the tension. They didn't know what Elias had seen. They didn't know what it was like to be in the field with a partner who depended on you to make the right call. They didn't understand the weight of the dog's panic, of the PTSD that coursed through its trembling body. Please, Elias said softly, his gaze fixed on the dog. Let me help him. The officer hesitated, his fingers twitching near his taser. But Elias didn't flinch. He was no longer the man who had walked away from his past. He was the man who would make it right this time. He stepped forward, his boots crunching on the gravel. He didn't care about the officer, about the rules, or the risk. All he cared about was the dog. The officer made no move to stop him. With a deep breath, Elias reached the crate, crouching down to meet the dog's terrified gaze. It's okay, Elias murmured, his voice low, calm. I know what you're feeling. The dog's body was trembling, but as Elias knelt, the dog stopped thrashing. It blinked, its gaze shifting from the sky to Elias's face. There was something in those eyes, something that broke through the barrier of fear and confusion. Elias's hand reached out slowly, not in aggression, but with the quiet certainty of someone who had lived through more terror than he ever thought he could survive. His fingers brushed against the crate's cold bars, then against the dog's muzzle. For a long moment neither moved. Then the dog did something unexpected. It leaned its head forward just an inch. And in that moment Elias knew. This wasn't about saving a dog. This was about facing his own demons. I'm here, he whispered. We'll get through this together. The minutes felt like hours. Slowly, Elias unlatched the crate. The dog didn't jump out immediately. It hesitated, as though testing whether it was safe to trust again. Then, as if making a choice, it stepped out into the open, its body still shaking, but its steps growing steadier. For the first time in weeks, Elias felt the weight on his chest begin to lift. The dog was free, yes, but more than that, Elias felt free too. But that moment was short-lived. The officer, now visibly angered by Elias's actions, moved to intervene. That's enough, he shouted, taking a step forward. But Elias turned to him, his face hardening. Don't make this worse, Elias said, his voice cold. Let the dog be. Let me handle this. The officer opened his mouth to retort, but the words died in his throat. The man who had tried to exert control, the one who had been so quick to end the dog's life, suddenly found himself outmatched by Elias's quiet strength. Suddenly, a loud sound rang through the air, a sharp crack followed by a heavy thud. Both Elias and the officer turned, just in time to see the dog, now standing proudly, unleash a vicious bark, charging toward the officer. The officer stumbled backward in surprise, but Elias acted quickly, stepping between them. He knew the dog wasn't attacking. It was just scared, and it was protecting the one person who had shown it kindness. I said let it be, Elias repeated, his voice firm. The officer, realizing that Elias wasn't backing down, hesitated. The crowd around them remained silent, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of disbelief and admiration. In that moment, a squad car screeched to a halt beside them. 2 more officers rushed out, their faces grim. But they weren't here to arrest Elias. They were here to arrest the officer who had been harassing the dog. It turned out the officer had a history of violent incidents involving animals, one of the many reasons he had been assigned to the animal control unit. Elias had known about the officer's reputation, but had never expected him to be the one to push things this far. David, the new officer said, his tone cold. You're done. David's face turned pale as the officers moved to cuff him. He didn't fight them. He couldn't. His reputation had finally caught up with him. With the officer subdued and taken away, Elias watched as the dog, now calm, walked slowly back to him. He kneeled down and let the dog nuzzle into his side. "You're safe now," Elias said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. The dog gave a low whine, and Elias smiled. For the first time in years, the weight of his past, the burden of guilt and regret, felt a little lighter. He hadn't just saved the dog. He had saved himself. Elias stood by the window of the small cabin, the soft light of dawn breaking through the mist, casting a pale glow on the wet earth. The quiet, something he'd never known before, filled him in a way he hadn't expected. Last night, when he saw the dog finally find peace in his arms, Elias realized something. He too had found a piece of himself he thought was lost forever. He thought back to the moment in the ravine, sitting there with Wolf, no fear, no hesitation. In the dog's eyes, he saw forgiveness, a kind of forgiveness he'd been seeking for years. That moment, much like the last time he saw Max, was the moment Elias understood. He hadn't just saved the dog. He had saved himself. He had to face his own demons, and sometimes to heal, you need to confront what you've been running from. "We both made it," Elias whispered to Wolf, as the dog gently nuzzled into his side, calm at last. As Elias walked out of the cabin, the morning air felt different, clearer. His steps were lighter. Wolf's once wobbly gait had steadied, each step full of trust. The past, the fears, the guilt, it all seemed to slip away with every step he took toward the open road. He glanced over his shoulder one last time. This was no longer just a story of a man rescuing a dog. It was the story of a man rescuing himself. The truth was never easy, but it was worth facing. The strength to heal comes not from running but from standing still, from embracing the pain and moving forward. Elias didn't sleep that night. Not because of fear, because of clarity. As Wolf lay curled beside the wood stove, breathing steady for the first time since the pier, Elias finally understood what had been pulling at him all these years. It wasn't the blast. It wasn't the guilt. It was the belief that some wounds never find a place to rest. But watching Wolf's chest rise and fall, he realized they could. By sunrise, the cabin felt different. Not quieter, warmer. Wolf followed him outside, paws sinking into the damp earth, nose lifted to the cedar-scented breeze. Elias felt something shift inside him, small but unmistakable, a room he'd kept locked finally opening. He didn't need to say it out loud, but the truth formed anyway. He wasn't alone anymore. As they walked together toward the treeline, Wolf brushed against his leg, as if reminding him that survival was never meant to be solitary. And for the first time since Max, Elias let himself believe in the possibility of a future that didn't hurt to look at. The moment settled in his memory like a photograph. Wolf standing in the early gold of morning, eyes steady, waiting for the man who finally chose to stop running. If this journey moved you even a little, hit like, share the story, and subscribe to Canada's Heartfelt Tales. Your support helps these stories find the people who need them most.